Imagine you're quietly living your life, believing in justice, and trusting that truth always wins in the end, when suddenly, everything shatters around you. A routine drive home from work turns into a nightmare. A power-hungry cop singles you out because of the color of your skin, and in the blink of an eye, you're facing consequences that could ruin your entire future. But what happens when karma steps in with unexpected force? What unfolds in the courtroom will leave you speechless. This is the story of a devoted daughter, a determined fighter, and a shocking twist of fate that shakes an entire community. Mariah Bennett was a woman who prided herself on two things: her unwavering love for her family and her dedication to her job. She had grown up in the Roseland neighborhood of Chicago, where neighbors became extended family and love was measured by acts of kindness. Mariah's mother, Ruth, was a retired nurse who had worked long shifts at Advocate Trinity Hospital on the city's south side, and her father, William, had been a postal worker who delivered letters for decades with a smile. From them, Mariah learned resilience. When times got tough, as they often did in underfunded neighborhoods, her parents made sure she understood that a strong heart and a solid moral compass would guide her through any storm. Mariah had put herself through college with scholarships and part-time jobs, working late nights at a local McDonald's while juggling community service events on weekends. By the time she graduated, she had built a network of people who admired her for her grit, intelligence, and unyielding sense of right and wrong. Those qualities landed her a marketing position at a rising tech startup in Chicago's bustling downtown district. The company was real. It was the well-known software giant Salesforce, whose Midwest headquarters offered brilliant opportunities for driven young people. Mariah worked as a marketing associate, commuting each day to a sleek skyscraper with floor-to-ceiling windows, eager to prove her worth. She loved her job. She was proud that, through her marketing strategies and campaigns, she could contribute to a company that created real impact. Despite her success, she never forgot her roots or the neighbors who watched her grow up. Every Thursday evening, she volunteered at a local youth center to mentor teenage girls about pursuing their dreams. She'd never miss a chance to remind them that anything was possible with hard work, focus, and integrity. It was on one of those days, after staying late at the youth center to help an aspiring writer perfect her college application essay, that Mariah's life would take a terrifying turn. She didn't know it then, but the driving force behind the upcoming chaos would be an officer with a nasty grudge against anyone who looked like her. In a matter of hours, she would be standing on the side of the road, her world crumbling, and a racist narrative would begin painting her as a criminal. The clock neared 11:00 p.m. as Mariah pulled out of the youth center's parking lot. The building was surrounded by flickering street lamps and a calm hush that typically embraced the neighborhood once the sun went down. She was tired but satisfied, replaying the day's events in her mind: successful sessions with the teenage girls, a gratifying day at work, and an open weekend ahead to spend with her beloved family. Her phone buzzed with a text from her younger sister, Tasha, who asked if Mariah could pick up some last-minute snacks for a cousin's birthday party the next day. Mariah sighed, a smile stretching across her face, and tapped out a quick reply. Sure thing. She figured she'd drop by the 24-hour Walmart on the way home. That was when she spotted the distinct headlights of a Chicago Police Department cruiser behind her. Mariah glanced at her speedometer, noticing she was under the speed limit, so she relaxed, assuming it was just a regular patrol. That assumption vanished as soon as the flashing lights erupted behind her. For a moment, disbelief made her hesitate before she slowly pulled over to the curb. Her heart pounded. She'd never been so afraid, but she told herself to remain calm. Remembering her father's instructions, she turned off the engine, kept her hands on the steering wheel, and waited. The overhead streetlight revealed a tall, broad-shouldered officer emerging from the cruiser. She caught sight of his name tag, Officer Bradley Tomlinson. Without warning, the officer approached her window, shining a blinding flashlight inside. His face was stone cold, his eyes narrowed, clearly sizing her up. "License and registration," he said curtly. His tone already carried an edge that made Mariah's skin crawl. "Yes, officer," she replied politely. She reached into her glove compartment with trembling fingers, the overhead light reflecting off her well-organized documents. She handed them over, heart thumping in her ears. The officer snatched them without a word, retreated to his cruiser, and left her in the nerve-wracking silence. Minutes ticked by 5, 10, 15. Mariah tried to control her growing sense of panic. She knew she hadn't broken any traffic rules. She was going the speed limit, her taillights and headlamps were functional, and she had just renewed her registration a month ago. Then came the return. Officer Tomlinson approached the car once more, and his entire demeanor screamed intimidation. He demanded she step out of the vehicle, claiming there was a suspicious odor emanating from her car. Confused, Mariah stepped out, her heart hammering against her ribcage. She had never done drugs, let alone smoked anything. As soon as she was outside, the officer grabbed her wrist with unnecessary force, twisting her arm behind her back. The shock turned to outrage and fear. She tried to protest, but any words she managed to form fell on deaf ears. "You resisting, lady?" Officer Tomlinson snapped, his voice low and threatening. All she could do was shake her head, tears pricking her eyes. Before she knew it, she was in handcuffs, her body shoved against the side of her car. The invasive search that followed left her shaking and humiliated. Nothing was found, of course, but Tomlinson wasn't done. "You're under arrest for resisting a lawful stop," he declared. Next thing she knew, Mariah was shoved into the back of the cruiser, and every dream, every shred of hope, felt as though it was collapsing around her. The police station smelled of bleach and stale coffee. Mariah was led through the corridors, her heart pounding louder with every step. She was fingerprinted, photographed, and finally placed in a holding cell, the cold metal bench pressed into her bones as exhaustion took over. She kept replaying the scene in her head, trying to make sense of it. Why? The question looped incessantly. Why had this happened? Why her? She'd grown up in a community where encounters with the police could often end in tragedy, but Mariah had diligently followed the law her entire life. Was all that overshadowed by just one officer's whim. More disturbing was the hateful glare in Officer Tomlinson's eyes. It had been so personal. She had felt stripped of her dignity the moment he laid hands on her, as though her mere existence warranted suspicion. Dawn was beginning to break by the time her friend and mentor Angela arrived to post bail. Angela was an attorney she'd met through the youth center, a sharp legal mind who specialized in civil rights cases. Angela's face was pale with anger, but she kept her tone steady, explaining that they would fight these charges immediately. "I'm going to get you out of here," she promised, her voice steady yet laced with urgency. "This is wrong on so many levels." Once released, Mariah could barely hold herself together. Disoriented and shaking, she walked out of the station into the early morning light. Camera crews weren't there for her, and no throngs of protesters lined the street. For the world at large, it was just another routine arrest in a city that saw thousands of such cases every year. But for Mariah, it was a catastrophic fall into a nightmare she never saw coming. Once home, she collapsed onto her bed and cried until her tears ran dry. Her mother, Ruth, sat beside her, stroking her hair, offering words of comfort that did little to quell the turmoil in Mariah's heart. By the end of that first day, she received a call from Angela confirming they would fight these charges in court. Angela believes strongly that if they got the dash cam and body cam footage, the entire charade would unravel. Yet, somewhere deep in her gut, Mariah sensed that Officer Tomlinson wouldn't let justice be served so easily. She had caught a glimpse of his smug sneer and recognized the quiet arrogance of someone convinced they were untouchable. The official charge was resisting arrest. Officer Tomlinson claimed he had smelled marijuana in her car, demanded she step out, and that Mariah had pushed him, allegedly assaulting a police officer. It was a bizarre charge, one that could potentially derail Mariah's life if it stuck. A criminal conviction might jeopardize her position at Salesforce and decimate her future career prospects. On top of that, the press, albeit briefly, ran a local piece about the arrest. A snippet of a police blotter was picked up by a small online news site, painting Mariah as just another offender in a city plagued with drug issues. Seeing her name in that context made her ill. Friends from college and colleagues from Salesforce reached out, asking what had happened. She told them only the basics, too humiliated and afraid to delve into the raw, painful details. Angela got to work immediately, filing motions to release the officer's dashcam footage and body camera recordings. Days turned into weeks, and, suspiciously, that footage didn't materialize. First, the police department said there were technical delays. Then they claimed the files were corrupted. Next, they insisted they had found the footage, but that it was incomplete. It was a maddening runaround that painted a clear picture of sabotage. Meanwhile, rumors circulated, quiet whispers among community members who'd had their own experiences with Tomlinson. A local barber said the officer had roughed him up 3 years prior. An elderly churchgoer mentioned he'd seen the man verbally abuse a teenager on the street. It seemed that Officer Tomlinson had a pattern, though complaints never stuck. The police union had closed ranks around him each time, citing a lack of substantial evidence. Mariah tried to maintain her composure at work, but the stress weighed heavily on her. She missed deadlines, lost focus in meetings, and her usual sunny demeanor was replaced by tense silences. She confided in her manager, who was sympathetic but also cautious. She sensed the wheels turning in her team's heads. Could a pending criminal charge jeopardize the company's reputation? Despite their outward support, Mariah noticed a subtle shift, an invisible barrier forming that she could not break through. A month after the arrest, Angela got a tip from a sympathetic intern in the public defender's office. There might be a copy of the dashcam footage in an off-site storage database, perhaps one that never made it through the police department's manipulations. This glimmer of hope drove Angela to file an emergency discovery motion, prompting the court to demand immediate release of all relevant video and audio files. That night, Mariah found herself at her parents' home, eating the comfort food her mother had prepared: homemade fried chicken, collard greens, and warm cornbread. She felt a shred of optimism return. As she and Ruth cleaned dishes in the cramped but cozy kitchen, Ruth gently reminded her, "Baby, the truth always comes out. You keep your head high. Don't let that man break your spirit." Mariah hugged her mother, tears brimming once again, and prayed silently for a resolution. She wanted her life back, wanted to feel safe driving home at night, to not start trembling when she saw police lights. She still had nightmares about being pinned against her car, the officer's hand pressing into her back so hard it left bruises for days. A week later, the motion for discovery was granted. Mariah and Angela braced themselves for the footage that, if intact, could finally exonerate her. The tension was electric in Angela's small law office as they waited for the files. They hoped for an unedited record that would not only prove her innocence, but expose Officer Tomlinson's misconduct once and for all. When the files arrived, they came with a peculiar note from the police department's legal counsel, warning that the footage was incomplete due to technical errors. Undeterred, Angela played them on her laptop in the office's cramped conference room. Mariah's heart pounded with each second of the dashcam feed. The scene unfolded, Tomlinson's squad car trailing behind Mariah's sedan. The final seconds showed her pulling over. Then, abruptly, the video cut to black. Frustration and disappointment sank in. The supposedly crucial footage was missing. But Angela wasn't one to quit. She rewound the video and played it again, scanning every frame like a detective. That was when she noticed the timestamp on the dashcam. There was a sudden jump of several minutes, an indication that footage was deliberately removed. They moved on to the body camera footage next, which was also incomplete. But there, in the final frames, was something unusual. The corner of the screen briefly captured another set of headlights pulling up behind the officer's cruiser. A civilian's car? Another cop's car? That's not Tomlinson's backup, is it? Angela asked, her brow furrowing. A quick check of the official records showed no backup had been dispatched. The presence of that second set of headlights sparked a new line of inquiry. Could a bystander have recorded what really happened? Within days, Angela tapped into her community network. With the help of local activists and neighbors, she posted a request on social media. Were you driving near 57th and Wentworth on this date and time? Did you record or see anything unusual? The response was lukewarm at first. But soon, a private message came in from a man named Terence who claimed he'd been driving through the area that night. He thought the officer's behavior looked suspicious enough for him to pull out his phone and record from a distance. Terence's footage, shaky but raw, captured everything the official cameras missed. The video showed Tomlinson yanking Mariah out of the car, twisting her arm roughly. You could hear Mariah pleading, "I haven't done anything wrong." The camera caught the officer slamming her against the car hood. Terence had recorded until Tomlinson shot him a glare, at which point he drove off in fear of being targeted next. When Angela and Mariah watched Terence's phone video, tears of relief streamed down Mariah's face. Here was undeniable proof of Tomlinson's brutality and the absence of any resistance on Mariah's part. The entire narrative Officer Tomlinson had spun was a lie. Armed with this, Angela believed they didn't just have a defense, they had a damning indictment of Tomlinson's conduct. The hearing date loomed. Word had spread about Terence's video, and soon the local media caught wind of it. A well-regarded journalist from the Chicago Tribune reached out for a statement. Angela encouraged Mariah to share her story, though she advised caution. They had the video in their possession, but releasing it too soon might tip off Tomlinson or give the police union time to concoct a counter-narrative. Tensions soared. Mariah began receiving strange phone calls, heavy breathing on the other end, then silence. Her car's tires were mysteriously slashed one morning. It felt like intimidation tactics designed to deter her from pursuing justice. She reported these incidents, but her complaints seemed to go nowhere. It was as if Tomlinson had eyes and ears within the department that ensured her pleas for help fell on deaf ears. Nightmares plagued her. She'd wake up, sweating and trembling, convinced she could still feel Tomlinson's grip on her arm. As the court date approached, Angela insisted on increased security, and community leaders rallied around Mariah. Groups like Black Lives Matter and local faith leaders from Chicago's churches stepped up to show solidarity. They filled the courthouse steps with supportive chants, carrying signs that read, "Justice for Mariah and no more police abuse." Mariah was overwhelmed by their support, but also terrified of letting them down. She felt the weight of not just her own future, but the hopes of countless people who had experienced similar injustices. The day before the hearing, she visited her father's grave, kneeling by the modest headstone under a sprawling oak tree. William had passed away from cancer a few years prior, and Mariah felt his absence acutely. She let her tears fall, silently promising him she would fight with every ounce of strength she had. The courtroom was packed on the day of Mariah's hearing. On one side of the aisle sat Tomlinson, cold and unflinching in his uniform, backed by the formidable police union. On the other side, Mariah sat with Angela, flanked by her trembling mother and a crowd of supporters. The tension in the air was palpable, like a coiled spring ready to snap. The prosecutor read the charges against Mariah, resisting arrest and assaulting an officer. Mariah's stomach turned at every false allegation. Officer Tomlinson took the stand first. With a calm voice and steady gaze, he lied through his teeth, recounting how he smelled marijuana and how Mariah had supposedly become belligerent, shoving him in the chest. He described a struggle that escalated, forcing him to protect himself. Sitting across from him, Mariah felt a rush of rage. The way he twisted reality so casually, so convincingly, chilled her to the bone. But Angela let him talk, meticulously noting every inconsistency. Then she rose, her posture erect, radiating a quiet, fierce determination. She began with standard questions, forcing Tomlinson to reaffirm details that the dashcam was malfunctioning. Then she pivoted. "Officer Tomlinson, you claim the dashcam was malfunctioning. Isn't it standard procedure to report malfunctions at the start of your shift?" Tomlinson stammered, clearly unprepared. "And you also claim no footage was captured on your body camera after the initial stop." He nodded stiffly. Angela paused for effect. "Then can you explain this?" She signaled to the technician at the back of the courtroom. The lights dimmed and the projector lit up. Terrence's video played, the shaky footage capturing Mariah's arrest in its raw brutality. The silence in the courtroom was deafening, broken only by the distant echo of Mariah's pleading voice in the video. The final frames showed Tomlinson slamming her onto the hood, contradicting everything he had just testified. A shocked murmur rippled through the spectators. Tomlinson's face paled, his jaw clenched. The judge, a stern woman with piercing eyes, demanded an explanation. Caught off guard, Tomlinson mumbled about how he had felt threatened, how video can be deceiving, but it was clear the tide had turned. In a dramatic turn, Angela then called Terrence to the stand. He testified about what he had seen, how he had felt compelled to record, and how fearful he was to come forward. His testimony was unpolished but sincere, striking a chord with everyone in the courtroom. Every second hammered another nail into the coffin of Tomlinson's lies. But the real bombshell dropped when Angela introduced a last-minute piece of evidence, a digital forensic report from the police department's own system showing the dashcam footage had been tampered with. The timestamp logs indicated that portions of the video were manually erased at a specific date and time. On the same night, Tomlinson wrote his incident report. Gasps filled the courtroom. Now, it wasn't just Mariah's word against Tomlinson's. Hard digital evidence proved deliberate falsification of police records. The judge's expression darkened. In a sharp tone, she demanded Tomlinson's counsel respond. The police union attorney looked flustered, fumbling for words, offering only half-formed excuses. Finally, the judge ordered an immediate recess, her voice echoing, "We will reconvene this afternoon after I've reviewed these materials." The courtroom's energy crackled like static electricity. When court resumed, everyone braced for the judge's ruling. Mariah could hardly breathe. She squeezed her mother's hand, feeling a sense of solidarity from the crowd behind her. The judge began by addressing the unprecedented level of deceit laid bare in the proceedings. She dismissed the charges against Mariah outright, citing clear evidence that she had been falsely accused. As relief flooded Mariah's body, tears pooled in her eyes. Yet the judge wasn't done. She turned her gaze to Tomlinson, who remained stiff in his seat. "The court will not tolerate perjury or falsification of police reports," she declared, her tone icy. She ordered an investigation into Tomlinson's conduct, hinting strongly at potential perjury charges. And then, with one final command, she demanded an internal affairs review into the missing dashcam footage and any other complaints against Tomlinson that were previously dismissed. A wave of cheers erupted from Mariah's supporters, while Tomlinson and his legal team stood there shell-shocked. It felt like an avalanche had just crashed down on him, swiftly and without mercy. This was the hard karma that Mariah and so many others had prayed for. Finally, it seemed that the system, so often stacked against people like Mariah, was tilting toward justice. In the days that followed, Mariah's life began to stabilize. She was officially cleared of all charges, and Salesforce's HR department assured her that her position was secure. Even her manager apologized for the distance that had developed in the office, offering unconditional support and praising her courage. Meanwhile, the investigation into Tomlinson's conduct widened. More people came forward, neighbors, past victims, and even a junior police officer who admitted he'd been pressured to remain silent about Tomlinson's racially charged language. Tomlinson was suspended from duty pending the outcome of the internal affairs investigation. The story made local headlines: police officer under fire for alleged racial profiling and evidence tampering. For Mariah, it was a bittersweet validation. She couldn't erase the humiliation and terror she had endured, but seeing the truth come to light felt like a triumph. Community organizations reached out to her, inviting her to speak about her experience. She told her story at town halls, in front of college students, and on local radio segments. People listened, eyes brimming with empathy and outrage. In a sense, her ordeal became a rallying cry for reform. She felt that this was bigger than her. It was about exposing a pattern that had festered in the shadows for too long. Months later, Tomlinson faced multiple charges, including filing a false police report and obstruction of justice. At the disciplinary hearing, he appeared diminished, no longer the smug officer who had pinned Mariah against her own car. Evidence kept piling up, revealing he had systematically targeted black men and women with phony charges and intimidation tactics for years. This time, the system didn't protect him. He was dismissed from the force, and a criminal trial loomed. Mariah, for her part, found a renewed sense of purpose. Though she continued her work at Salesforce, she also became an advocate for policing reform and a supporter of legal defense funds for those who couldn't afford attorneys. She collaborated with Angela to create workshops that taught young people about their rights during police encounters. The first workshop launched at the youth center, where she had spent so many evenings mentoring teenage girls. A year after her arrest, Mariah was invited to speak at a community gala attended by city officials, civil rights lawyers, and activists. Standing on the stage, her voice quavering at first, she recounted her harrowing experience and the vital role that truth and video evidence had played. She spoke of the fear, the humiliation, and the unwavering support from people who believed in justice. When she finished, the standing ovation lasted long enough to bring tears to her eyes. That night, she realized something fundamental. While the scars remained, she had survived and transformed her suffering into a catalyst for change. And although she had faced a racist cop whose malice nearly destroyed her life, the power of evidence, community, and sheer perseverance had turned the tide. Thank you for joining us on this emotional roller coaster, a reminder that sometimes the darkest challenges reveal our brightest strengths. Mariah's story shows the dangers of unchecked power, but also the triumph that's possible when good people stand up for what's right. Her ordeal sparked a movement for transparency, accountability, and the belief that no one should ever be treated as a criminal just because of their skin color. If this story resonated with you, help us spread the message. Please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue shining a light on stories that might otherwise remain hidden. Your support means everything. Together, we can keep the conversation going, fight injustice wherever it rears its head, and champion a future where fairness and respect lead the way for everyone.